He walked into his own barn and was never seen again. That is the only line that survived in the archives of Green Hollow, Kentucky. In 1847, a quiet farming town whispered about a man named Samuel O'Brien, whose sudden disappearance was spoken of only in veiled tones. The official record listed him as missing, but among the locals there was another story, one so grotesque, so unspeakable, it was carried only in rumor and fever. Dream confessions. They said his wife, Catherine, had fed him to the pigs. But the O'Brien case was not just a tale of marital vengeance. It was the symptom of something larger, a sickness at the heart of rural Kentucky in the 19th century. For beneath the town's small chapel, behind the locked doors of its orphanage, and deep in the fertile soil of its farms, there were rituals of silence. Families went missing, children vanished. And Catherine's story became the crack in the mask of Green Hollow, a glimpse into what the community had been burying for generations. What if this wasn't simply a murder? What if Catherine O'Brien had uncovered something her husband was part of, something older than the town itself? Tonight, we reopen a case Kentucky tried to erase, and you will see how one woman's unthinkable act of violence became the key to a darkness that still haunts the hills. The town of Green Hollow was not on most maps. It lay hidden in the hills, accessible only by dirt tracks carved through dense, oppressive forest. Outsiders described the place as insular, a community bound together by its church, its farmhands, and its cattle trade. But insiders knew better. Green Hollow was not merely secretive, it was protective. The townspeople did not welcome questions. When Samuel O'Brien disappeared, it was not the town sheriff who investigated. Instead, it was the church elders. They arrived at Catherine's home, not with notebooks and lanterns, but with Bibles and locked boxes. Whatever testimony Catherine gave that night was never written down. Neighbors described Catherine as hollow-eyed, a woman who avoided company, who whispered to her pigs as though they understood more than people. They claimed she had once buried something in her yard in the dead of night, though none dared dig it up. In 1847, Kentucky was a land of shifting loyalties, caught between the slaveholding South and the restless abolitionist North. Violence was common, disappearances were overlooked, but Green Hollow was different. Here there was no violence without ritual, no disappearance without scripture, and if Catherine truly fed her husband to the pigs, it was not out of madness, it was part of something much darker. The union of Catherine and Samuel O'Brien was not one of love. It was a transaction brokered by the church and finalized in whispers. Samuel was wealthy by Green Hollow standards, inheriting both land and livestock. Catherine was brought into the marriage by the town elders themselves. Some say she was an orphan raised in the church's hidden wing, a child who had never truly been allowed to leave its grasp. Samuel was known for cruelty. Farmhands spoke of his punishments, his hunger for control, his fondness for forcing others to kneel. Catherine lived in his shadow, a silent, pale figure. Yet neighbors noticed something strange. Though Samuel had pigs, it was Catherine who tended them. She fed them alone at night, whispering prayers no one could quite hear. Years later, a fragment of a sermon preserved in the archives of Green Hollow contained a curious warning. The wife is the mirror of the husband's sin. When the reflection cracks, the house shall fall. Many historians now believe this was directed at the O'Briens, that Catherine's very presence in the marriage was meant as containment, as punishment, or as sacrifice. But Catherine did not remain a silent wife. Something inside her stirred, and when Samuel vanished into the mouth of the farm, the boundaries between punishment and revelation dissolved. Green Hollow's church ran more than Sunday services. Hidden behind its chapel was an orphanage, known publicly as a place of charity. But the truth was far darker. Children raised within its walls rarely left. Some were placed into marriages arranged by the elders. Others disappeared entirely, their names never written in county records. Catherine herself was one of these children. Born of unknown parentage, she was raised in silence, taught obedience, and fed scripture that spoke not of salvation, but of bloodlines and duty. The church did not give orphans freedom. It gave them as offerings. Samuel O'Brien's marriage was not the only one arranged in this way. Families across Green Hollow carried the blood of the orphanage in their veins. It was a cycle of control, of selection. The elders spoke of purity, But what they meant was something older, a hidden lineage they were trying to maintain. When Catherine married Samuel, she was not his partner, she was his keeper. Her role was to absorb his sins, to hold his secrets. But Samuel underestimated her, and in the silence of the pig pen, she began to unlearn her obedience. Samuel O'Brien kept pigs, as many farmers did, but his herd was different, larger, fiercer. Neighbors swore the animals' eyes gleamed with unnatural intelligence, that they moved as one, as though guided by an unseen hand. Catherine alone fed them. She brought them scraps of meat long after the house had gone dark. Some claimed they heard screams carried on the night wind, cut off too quickly to be human. Folklore in rural Kentucky spoke of pigs as more than animals. They were seen as vessels, creatures that could consume what men could not bury. Old wives told stories of sins devoured by swine, of souls swallowed whole, leaving the land untainted. It was said that in times of famine, certain families had turned to pigs not just for food, but for absolution. When Samuel disappeared, it was not simply a matter of murder. Catherine had not only rid herself of a cruel husband, she had performed a ritual older than the church itself. And the pigs of Green Hollow had eaten more than flesh. They had eaten memory, guilt, perhaps even history. When Samuel vanished, Catherine did not flee. She sat quietly in her home, waiting, and it was not the sheriff who came, but the elders of the church. They entered her home with solemn faces, carrying leather-bound books. They questioned her in whispers, their hands resting on her table as though consecrating it. Witnesses claimed the meeting lasted until dawn. No notes were taken, no accusations spoken aloud. When they left, Catherine was not arrested. Instead, they gave her a new Bible. One neighbor swore he saw a mark on its cover, an emblem burned into the leather that did not belong to any Christian faith. After that night, the town did not speak of Samuel O'Brien again. His land, his debts, his name, all vanished from official record. It was as though he had never existed, and Catherine remained, feeding the pigs as if nothing had changed. The elders had not come to condemn her. They had come to sanctify what she had done. Behind the O'Brien farm was a pit where waste was dumped, a place avoided by the townsfolk. Children dared not go near it, swearing it gave off a humming sound at night, like a swarm of bees beneath the earth. After Samuel's disappearance, neighbors saw Catherine kneeling at the edge of the pit, lips moving in prayer. One farmhand swore he saw her lower something into the pit, a bundle wrapped in cloth, too large to be food scraps. Weeks later, the soil around the pit shifted unnaturally, rising and falling as though breathing. The pigs gathered at its edge but never entered. Some historians now believe the pit was not waste at all, but a burial site, used for generations. A sinkhole of offerings, a mouth to something older than Green Hollow itself. If Samuel was indeed fed to the pigs, what was lowered into the pit afterward, flesh, bones, or the last fragments of a soul the pigs could not consume. The orphans of Green Hollow were forbidden to speak of the O'Briens, but children cannot keep secrets forever. In later years, journals from those who escaped the orphanage contained disturbing entries. Miss Catherine says pigs can eat voices. They told us not to look at the pit, but I saw hands moving. He comes at night, the man with no skin, looking for his wife. The children drew pictures, charcoal sketches of Catherine standing among pigs whose faces resembled people. They drew Samuel with hollow eyes, mouth wide as though screaming but no sound escaping. When confronted, the church dismissed the drawings as childish nightmares. But nightmares often reveal what adults refuse to acknowledge. In 1891, decades after Catherine's death, a ledger was discovered in the false wall of the Green Hollow Chapel. It contained names, dates, and cryptic phrases given to the earth, consumed by the herd, unmarked but forgiven. Samuel O'Brien's name was among them. But beside his name was not the word forgiven. It was a symbol, an inverted cross pierced by a circle, the same emblem neighbors had seen on Catherine's Bible. The ledger revealed a chilling truth. Samuel was not the only one. Dozens of townspeople had vanished over the years, their names carefully catalogued. Husbands, wives, even children. Each disappearance explained away, each body never found. The O'Brien case was not an anomaly. It was part of a cycle, and Catherine was not the first wife to feed sin to the pigs. She was only the first to survive it. In ordinary towns, a woman accused of murdering her husband would be dragged to trial, if not lynched outright. But Green Hollow was not ordinary. No court records exist for Catherine, no indictment, no testimony, no punishment. It was as though the church itself had shielded her, wrapping her crime in scripture. To outsiders, the O'Briens were a family who moved away. To locals, silence was enforced, but silence is never empty, it festers, and by the 1850s, whispers of Catherine's act spread beyond Green Hollow. Travelers avoided the town. Preachers in neighboring counties warned against a valley where wives do the work of the grave. The legend of Catherine O'Brien became a ghost story. Yet the truth was far worse. Legends exaggerate. The truth in Green Hollow was deliberately minimized. In most folklore, pigs are symbols of greed or gluttony, but in Green Hollow they were something more. They were priests. They consumed what the congregation could not bear. It was said that sins could be whispered into the ears of the pigs, who would carry them away in their flesh, that by devouring corruption the animals cleansed the land, but the question lingered, what happened to the pigs afterward? Some said their meat was sold, that the very people of Green Hollow ate the flesh of their own guilt. Communion not with bread and wine, but with swine. If Catherine fed Samuel to the pigs, then the town did not just bury him. They ingested him. Samuel O'Brien became part of Green Hollow itself. By the 1860s, Catherine was no longer seen as a victim nor as a murderer. She was something else entirely. Visitors described her eyes as glassy, unblinking, as though reflecting things no one else could see. Children avoided her, men lowered their gaze, women whispered that she did not age like the rest, that her skin remained pale, unwrinkled, even as decades passed. Some said Catherine carried a smell of copper and earth, as if she had been buried alive. Others swore she could silence a room simply by entering. What had she seen in the pit? What had the pigs whispered back to her? And why, until her death, did she never leave the O'Brien farm? In 1872, the orphanage burned. Official records list the cause as accidental fire, but survivors told a different story. They claimed the older children set it ablaze after discovering a hidden cellar filled with bones. Among those bones, they said, were fragments of human teeth, pig skulls, and one massive ledger larger than the rest, containing ritual diagrams. The children fled into the woods. Some were caught, returned, punished. Others vanished into the hills, never seen again. But a handful lived to tell their story decades later, and each one repeated the same thing. Catherine O'Brien was the key. Legend says Samuel O'Brien never truly left. Farmers in the 1880s claimed to see him wandering the fields at night, a figure without skin, mouth stretched wide. Pigs scattered at his presence. Dogs refused to bark. One woman swore she saw Catherine standing at her fence in the moonlight, speaking softly to the shadow of her husband, as if calming a restless animal. Perhaps Samuel was not devoured entirely. Perhaps the pigs took his body but left behind a fragment of spirit, hungry, unfinished, and perhaps Catherine alone could contain him. Behind the chapel of Green Hollow lies a patch of earth where no markers stand. Locals call it the Field of Forgiveness, but historians who studied the soil discovered signs of mass graves, layers of bones, human and animal intermingled. The church denied the findings, but the ledger told otherwise. Each name marked given to the earth had no grave, no stone, only this field. If Catherine fed Samuel to the pigs, then his remains likely ended here. But the soil was different. Dark, fertile, almost unnaturally rich. Corn grew higher there, flowers bloomed brighter. It was not a cemetery, it was a garden, and its roots drank from flesh. Catherine lived until 1889. She died alone, her body discovered in her chair, Bible open in her lap. But her corpse was strange. Witnesses described her as intact. No rot, no smell of death, skin smooth as marble. The church sealed her body in a coffin of iron, not wood. They buried her deep beneath the field of forgiveness. Some claimed they did not want her to rise. Others whispered they buried her not in fear, but in honor. Her pigs were slaughtered the next day, their meat salted, stored, and shared among the elders. It was the last communion of Catherine O'Brien. In the early 1900s, a historian named Ruth Carter attempted to document the O'Brien case. She visited Green Hollow, interviewed locals, and gathered records. Within months she vanished. Her papers were found decades later in a locked trunk. Pages torn, words smeared, but one sentence repeated again and again: "The pigs remember." County archives of Green Hollow also suffered a mysterious fire, destroying marriage, birth, and death records before 1850, almost as if someone wanted Catherine's story erased. But erasure does not cleanse. It only deepens the wound. Even today, the Church of Green Hollow refuses to acknowledge Catherine O'Brien. No sermons mention her, no plaques bear her name, but if you look closely at the altar, carvings of pigs can be seen in the wood. Stylized, hidden among vines and crosses, a reminder etched into holy space. Silence is the truest confession. What the Church does not say speaks louder than any hymn. Travelers still avoid Green Hollow. Locals warn that the soil there is cursed, animals go missing, voices are heard in the night, and sometimes in the pig pens of neighboring farms a figure appears, pale, hollow-eyed, watching. Farmers say pigs raised on Green Hollow land grow too quickly. Their eyes seem almost human, their hunger insatiable. It is as if Catherine's ritual never ended, as if Samuel's body, consumed and reconsumed, still circulates through the land, through the livestock, through the people. The story of Catherine O'Brien is not simply one of murder. It is a story of control of a church that turned orphans into offerings, of a town that fed its sins to swine, of a family consumed by ritual. Catherine broke the silence not by speaking, but by acting. By feeding her husband to the pigs, she tore open the mask of Green Hollow. What she revealed was not madness, but truth. A truth too heavy for the town to bear. And so they buried her, they burned records, they erased names, but the soil remembers, the pigs remember, and when you hear rustling in the night, when you feel the earth shift beneath your feet, remember this: some sins are not buried. They are fed.